So now that we know how to create a histogram, how to create a frequency distribution table, the last thing we're going to talk about is just some basic shapes that are seen in histograms. So if we realize, though, that some distributions have no shape, the common shapes are symmetric, skewed, and uniform. Another interest is how many peaks a graph may have. This is known as the modality of the distribution. So if I look at my first one, we would say that it's roughly a symmetric graph. And so we think about if I were to just, split that graph right in the middle, roughly it looks symmetric, right? You fold it on itself, it would look roughly symmetric. And we're going to talk about this distribution in much more length a little bit later in our class. But it is roughly, we would say roughly symmetric if we saw this type of histogram. Then I could see, I see bimodal and symmetric graph. So it's called bimodal because I have two peaks, right? So we'll talk about modes a little bit later as well. So it's bimodal because it has two peaks, and then it's still a symmetric graph, right? So again, if you think sort of cut that right down the middle, it would be symmetric. My skewed right graph, right, if I think of how this distribution is, so everything, right, my smaller values are to the right. And so the skewness talks about where my outliers are. And my outliers can be large or small values. So most of the data lies to the left, but there are some values, stretched out to the right. For my skewed left graph, I would see sort of the opposite. Now my outliers are to the left, and they represent small values. And so that would be, if we saw this type of histogram, that would be skewed left graph. And my last type of basic shape on a histogram is what we call a uniform graph. There's really no peaks, right? Most all of the data is sort of at the same level, and we would say this is uniform. And as we go through our class this semester, we will talk about different distributions, different shapes. So we'll talk a little bit more about these in depth.